Welcome to Snapwire's webinar. Today, we are talking about how brands are scaling visual content remotely and safely. Joining me today is our COO and co-founder, Ryan Duane, and product manager, Rachel Dulcich. I'll be your moderator today. I'm Erin Sun with the marketing team here at Snapwire. Just a quick reminder that this is being recorded and it will pop in your inbox shortly after, so don't worry if you miss out on anything. We also encourage questions here and comments, so please feel free to send them in as we go. All right, before we dive in, I do want to ask a few poll questions. So let's get into that. All right, see on the right here, what is your company type? Is it food or beverage, hospitality, tourism, events or sports, B2B, or financial business services? I know not everyone's going to fit into here, but please just do the best you can for whichever answer is appropriate to you. So I'll give about 2 more seconds on that one. Okay, so it looks like most of you are B2B. We got one from food and beverage. And then now we're going to move on to the next question, which is going to be, what is your role? Are you a CMO, VP of marketing? Are you a creative director, creative department? Are you in production? Are you a digital marketer or other? A lot of digital marketers, some other. Give about 2 more seconds on that one. All right. Yeah, so it's kind of tied for digital marketer and other. Okay. Next question, we're going to do, what is your company size? 1 to 10, 11 to 50, 51 to 200, 201 to 1,000, or more than 1,000. Looks like we've got some smaller companies and then tied for also 51 to 200. Sounds great. And then last 2 questions here. So really quick, have you heard of Snapwire? Obviously, I'm sure if you're here today, you probably have. But if you haven't, don't worry, you're in for a treat today. So yeah, looks like most of you have, which is great. And then last question is, are you interested in a Snapwire demo? All right. So if you haven't heard of us before, Snapwire is an all-in-one visual production platform and freelance marketplace. Feel free to request a demo here on our featured action. I will pop it up. It's going to show up on the bottom center here. So feel free to look at that whenever you need to. But let's get started. I'll hand it off to Ryan for a quick intro.
Cool. Thanks, Erin. Hey, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ryan. I'm the co-founder and head of product here at Snapwire. Obviously, the last year has been, I'm sure, full of changes for everybody. And so, we wanted to kind of spend some time talking a little bit about the product and how, brands are scaling content remotely in today's digital world. And yeah, I'll hand it off to Rachel to kind of introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her.
Hi there. Yeah, so my name is Rachel. I'm a product manager at Snapwire. So my job is largely learning about our customers and trying to build something to make their lives a little happier. So super excited to share some insights with you all about how that relates to remote production.
Cool. To kick things off, obviously obviously in the last year, we've seen a huge shift over into digital. And, while this was something that we've seen and has been trending, really since, 2000, 2001, where, we really had the .com boom, it's really just within probably the last, 12 to 24 months that we've seen it accelerate to the point that we actually have. And really, this has affected everything from, the types of resources that we've seen teams use to how they collaborate. Obviously, I think if you're like any of us, you've spent way too much time in front of Zoom over the last year. But, I think most importantly, one of the biggest trends we've seen shift is, how marketers and marketing teams are actually reaching their target audiences that previously either wasn't accessible to them before or just having to adapt to the changing environment. We've seen a lot of brands that traditionally have relied on, print media or, out-of-home advertising or other physical means of spreading awareness. They've been forced to kind of confront an environment that, is reliant on trying to get additional screen time with their consumers and how to create, more the ad age, thumb-stopping content. Whereas previously, there might be a couple big campaigns, every few years. I know one of the executives at PepsiCo a couple years ago used the famous phrase, what was once 4 content pieces in a year has now become 4,000, and budgets have remained stagnant since then. I really think that's a great way to kind of sum up how we've moved through this shift over the last 12 to 24 months. Obviously, the big elephant in the room is that, COVID is really what has exacerbated the situation. And, while some industries, were easier to predict, that would have been, that have been affected through COVID, like travel and, healthcare. Other industries we've seen explode without a ton of advance notice. Everything from e-commerce to, ed tech, as well as freelancing platforms, as companies have learned to adapt to a more remote world. They've really tried. We've seen a lot of companies try to, take what was working previously, adapt that, and begin to, move forward. And I think that a lot of these trends that we've seen, that were working previously or that were starting to gain a lot of momentum previously have now really essentially cemented themselves in our daily lives. I'd like to say that we're not going to be on Zoom, for much longer, but I, foresee that all of these, remote working trends, collaborative trends are really just going to kind of continue going forward. And I even seeing some of the industries that have been affected, and while they might have a, resurgence, later in the year, like travel, it seems like these brands are going to have to cope with how to, make consumers feel safe, be able to get back out into the physical world, and how are they kind of doing that through, through a digital experience, so that they can kind of maintain the level of growth that they were seeing, prior to COVID. One of the things I think that is going to inevitably become a thing of the past is, really the offline shopping experience. Most consumers, today state that they don't feel safe, going into stores and continue to shop, and that they'd rather actually transact online. And we've actually seen, over the last year, ironically, that, discretionary income for a lot of, higher income households has actually, remained within those households, and the savings in the United States has actually increased. Ultimately, I think this has, resulted in brands trying to, brands needing to adapt and create a more, comprehensive, digital experience for their consumers, because they're not able to approach them, in person anymore, or at least as often in person anymore. And ultimately, consumers, are kind of here to stay and continue to transact online like they were before. We've even seen, small businesses actually get forced into creating digital experiences, whereas previously, they didn't really have to consider this. Shopify has obviously just exploded in the last year, and you even have, the delivery economy companies like DoorDash, which have just exploded, as small business owners have had to, move forward with, the rest of the economy and figure out a way how to reach consumers in a new way that previously, they didn't have to. All of this kind of, rolls up into, how do these small business owners and, businesses in general that haven't had to have this digital experience, how do they, move forward and, reckon with these changes, and ultimately learn to keep their customers engaged through channels that they previously didn't have to rely on. Obviously the spike in e-commerce content has, we saw that huge spike occur, during the middle of COVID, where, most retail stores were shut down, and, we were forced to kind of, deal with a new way of, shopping for goods and services. But, I think that ultimately one of the largest effects that that's had, on, the economy or brands in general, is actually the creation of content through those, through those platforms. So, while we've seen most of these major, we've seen this major jump kind of happen initially, and it's started to level out. This demand for content has kind of continued to increase because people are still spending, much of their time online. Brands and businesses are still having to produce as much content as they were previously, if not more. And, I know at least for me personally, I'm constantly, looking at my screen time on Sunday night, hoping that it went down from the previous week, oftentimes to my own disappointment. But, it's really a matter of how do you keep your consumers engaged online, knowing that, screen time and, time in the digital space is nearly doubled. And, it's kind of here to stay essentially, as we move forward throughout 2021.
So as a result of having no choice but to be online all the time for not only e-com, but for our work life, our groceries, our social life, there's been this massive digital marketing growth, and the immediacy of the digital growth has not been expected. So marketing dollars are now being poured into digital, which is making it more competitive and it's making it more expensive. So this is leading to a higher risk in not getting the right content out there and enough of it, because brands are needing to try and test really quickly, and it's more expensive to do so. So brands are seeing the need to be constantly producing content in order to get in front of the digital audiences, and the content needs to be unique and engaging because it's so competitive out there. So we've seen brands get really creative over this last year with influencer marketing, where they can lean on their customers who have a large following, or sometimes a smaller, more closer knit following, as we've seen with more micro influencer marketing. And a lot of brands are using UGC as well, where they can go to their satisfied end users to create content for them in order to hit that required volume of content in a way that's still affordable, although the quality isn't always guaranteed in UGC methods. So they're also finding ways to produce content remotely that's high quality, owned, and consistent with the brand. And that brand consistency is heavily important in building the brand awareness. So we've also seen growth in platforms like Snapwire that helps them do so, because the brands are seeing that it's still possible to stand out and drive conversion without spending a fortune or sacrificing the quality.
Yeah, I mean, and from a hard numbers perspective, we've just seen the cost per click, just skyrocket over the last year. A lot of brands that were, traditionally very reliant on their, a few standard channels, and had a consistent strategy and a consistent way to see growth through those channels, is now just becoming unmanageable and not as cost effective. Really, this has resulted in a tightening of strategic interests for those brands, so that they can ensure that the content and the ad placements that they're putting out across these channels up front is actually what they think is going to work, and being willing to adapt very quickly if they're seeing it not work. Being able to get your ads to market faster, and then being able to iterate off of that more quickly has been more important than ever before because of this rising costs. And we've seen a lot of marketing teams and a lot of creative teams, strategize even beforehand. Okay, if plan A doesn't work, what's plan B? Plan B doesn't work, what's plan C? So that we can quickly move through our scenarios and not just be spending money on a growth strategy that's not working for us. And to no surprise, with cost per click going up, the cost per purchase is also rising. Ultimately, this has resulted in a higher cost of acquisition for most brands and businesses for their customers. While there's still different channels that people are finding that they can optimize on top of, planning in advance and planning content that's going to have its highest impact is incredibly important to be able to optimize the conversion funnel of not only new customers, but also existing customers. We've seen an increased importance on once you're acquiring net new customers, actually retaining them through content generation strategies. Especially in an age where at least I know for Snapwire internally, the moniker's been stronger, not faster, in terms of growth. And so companies are trying to reckon with this in terms of how do we grow stronger, and not just for the sake of growth, and be able to maintain our customer base once we've actually acquired them. We've also seen an emergence of alternative platforms and new platforms that have just come about within the last 12 months. I know last year we really saw the rise in TikTok and, the new types of content that were being generated through that platform. And now it's really just become a standard in terms of marketers being able to play, marketers considering that to be a standard for ad placement. This has also opened up an entirely new demographic of consumers that previously really weren't reachable through a lot of digital channels, or at least weren't quite as engaged through traditional advertising channels like Facebook and Instagram. And I know at least this year so far, within the last month or two, I've personally seen the emergence of Clubhouse, which has kind of coincided with the rise in podcasts and how popular just audio content has been over the years. It'll be interesting to kind of watch and see, if TikTok was kind of the big channel last year, and the rise in the new type of content that was being created there, and how marketers were going after customers. It'll be interesting to see how platforms like Clubhouse and its associated copycats begin to rise in the minds of marketers, and how they use those channels to reach like I said, new audiences, new demographics, and also ultimately create a new way or a new type of content medium that previously wasn't necessarily considered viable for customer acquisition. This obviously has led to a very competitive environment where there's more people online, there is more time being spent online, and ultimately it has become the primary source for brands to be able to reach their audience. And this has resulted in consumers being more savvy, more particular about the type of content that they're seeing, more particular about the type of ads that they're seeing. Customers don't want to just see because customers and consumers don't just want to see a product. They want to see the product, the specific product that they want, with the people that look like them and in the neighborhood that looks like theirs. The companies and brands we've seen be most successful over the last couple years, really even before COVID, are those that are leaning into this by creating hyper localized content that's at scale and is tailored specific to their audience. If I live in Santa Barbara, I want to see content that reflects my neighborhood, that reflect, and with the product that I'm looking for. Even in marketplaces, high transaction marketplaces like Amazon, where traditional product photos with just your standard white backdrop with the white box behind it have evolved over the last couple of years, where we're now seeing videos getting integrated into the carousels, and how the products are actually being used. We're now seeing additional photos get added in those carousels in these marketplaces, where it's more lifestyle centric. And I really think that we've also seen the emergence of platforms like Etsy, where people care more about where the product's coming from and the brand behind that product, whether it's coming from your local handmade independent seller, or whether or not it's coming from a brand that really resonates with you personally from a from a values standpoint. Those are really the people that we've seen thrive during COVID. Kind of going back to consumers being more wary about where they spend their money. They're really being selective about where they choose with brands that they resonate with. So, and this is really is the standard now of how how we need to be creating content for our audiences. Just kind of creating your run-of-the-mill evergreen content doesn't necessarily cut it anymore to be able to engage with the audiences that we're now having to deal with. And then, one of the last trends I think that's just important to point out, where that we've seen is, the in-housing of creative teams inside brands. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, with larger brands and businesses, while this was a trend, I think, within the last probably, 5 to 6 years, where larger brands and businesses were actually creating in-house agencies inside their organizations to be able to adapt more quickly and be able to act in a more agile environment. That's just accelerated really over the last year, from one standpoint, to be able to save costs, to be able to not work with outside agencies quite as often, to be able to produce this expensive content. And then second is to be able to be more agile. So these larger brands recognize that they need to produce content faster, and like we kind of said, the budgets aren't necessarily going up. And so how do they reckon with that? How do they create more content faster and at the same budgets that they're used to creating content at traditionally?
Yeah, that's a really good point that Ryan makes. We've seen this huge trend in enterprises bringing things in-house. I think it's something like 70% of all enterprises have brought creative in-house in some way. And all of this is to say that creating visual assets is so important to engaging audiences. And you don't need to just take it from us because we work on a visual production platform every day, but let's talk about how the brain works a little bit. So most of us are visual learners. I know I am. I have to get up and whiteboard things out in order to be creative or to process information myself. So visuals are really important in catching people's attention. Our brains take in the visuals really fast. So our brain decides whether we are going to take some information in probably before we're even conscious of that decision. And a brain can see something with a lot of information, like a text-heavy advertisement, as a cognitive threat, and it decides to throw it out right away and not engage the rest of our brain with it. Visuals capture attention and help people retain the information, specifically when the visual is relevant. And when I say relevant, I mean both to the information that they're supposed to be taking in and relevant to us as people, like Ryan was mentioning. We want to see something that looks like us in a place that we're used to being in with a product we're used to using. And a little bit of an extra note on the brain topic is that it also likes to be kept on its toes. So it likes a mixture of photos and videos and other types of multimedia as well when catching its eye. And the visuals themselves matter. So I think we already know that we need to have visuals, but the visuals themselves also need to capture the attention. So remember what I mentioned about how quickly our brain decides to entertain a piece of visual content. Well, if it looks inauthentic, our brains can quickly decide that we should keep scrolling. So even if it's not always a conscious thought, our mind interprets it and moves on as this doesn't relate to me, or this looks like something I've seen before, doesn't catch my eye. So relying historically on stock imagery has made the stock imagery a little bit stale and off-putting to consumers. And while this may not be a conscious decision in our minds, we see this happening in the conversion rates between stock photography and custom. So here's a little bit of a challenge. Which one, in your minds, think about which one do you think is stock and which one was created custom. Hopefully you guys got it right that the left one is a stock image. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody so happy to be eating a slice of cucumber. And when I look at this image, I get a little bit nervous that the food's going to fall off her plate because she's not holding it like you should be holding a plate. But then I look at the image on the right and I see it relates to me. And for the record, I know that I am in this brand's target audience because the Snapwire creator produced it. But as a woman about the same age as the woman in the photo, I can see myself doing this, wearing this. It's light and modern, and it's relevant for me. It was actually created for a financial application, and to me, it perfectly represents the comfortable lifestyle that they were going for.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from a qualitative standpoint, it's pretty easy to, notice the difference from our eyes, but also from a quantitative standpoint, when we're looking at, how to increase conversion rates, with this, all these other trends that are kind of just layering on top of one another. We've seen from our own customers and our own data a 30% increase in conversions when companies move towards a custom content model versus using stock or even off-brand UGC content. I think that this is important because as we've kind of hit on and as we've mentioned, your opportunities are becoming more limited with your consumers and their expectations are continuously rising. And, on top of all that, cost per clicks, cost of acquisition of these customers is increasing. And so it's important to be able to, where we can, where you can succeed through your advertisements, be able to take those opportunities and really capitalize off them. And this is really, this is really why we created Snapwire. and how was to empower marketers really to actually do this, empower creative teams and marketings to be able to create content that's more engaging, more authentic, and focus on what they want to do. I mean, this is, obviously this is all coincided with, like we've kind of hit on, the rise in social media, where, there's an increased demand for content throughout all these platforms. And, in conjunction with that, an increase of, supply of content creators throughout all these platforms, whether it's, Instagram and the inevitable, high quality outdoorsy lifestyle photo, or whether it's now through TikTok, where we're now seeing these, the extremes of, TikTok, content creators, influencers, and even now, like I said, through podcasting and Clubhouse, now these audio creators, this is really why Snapwire was created in the first place, was, to be able to bring this supply of, freelance talent, freelance creators that, are creating very high quality, engaging content with the brands that are ultimately demanding this. And, bringing these two parties together, empowering both of them to be able to create content at scale and be able to, continue to get content to market faster is really, where our focus has been, and, why we've continued to exist.
And now fast forward to 2020, there's this huge twist that not only accelerates that effect that social media was already having, but it puts remote production of visual content front and center, which is Snapwire's sweet spot. So brands are still needing to scale production, whether that be in volumes or in localization. And a big part of what brands are doing right now is figuring out, how do we do remote art direction? How do we not lose creative control, but still produce content without necessarily being on set every time? So they're realizing that they can still feel empowered to produce beautiful, high quality content and get those results without necessarily being in person. And COVID has actually acted as kind of a forcing factor to develop more scalable processes and options. When people aren't able to gather, then you have to find other ways. People are also realizing that there's actually not a need to travel, with the realization that you can get localized content without going halfway around the world to do so. You don't really even need to get off your couch. You can just do it all in a platform, while still making sure that you're checking in, communicating with a creator regularly, so that you still get the results that perfectly align with your vision. So that's what we've really been focusing on. Luckily, over the past few years, have we seen the digital shift already happening. We've been focusing on building the platform in order to empower these marketing and creative teams to be more agile and produce content just as quickly without losing the creative control. And the use of social media for brand awareness has also contributed to the growth that we've seen this past year, because more people are considering, how do we use social to build our brand? And that brand awareness requires custom content because of that consistency piece that I mentioned earlier. But the challenges marketers are facing now are, okay, we have a need for more content in less time with less resources. And what are our options? We could fully outsource this. We may spend a fortune and possibly not have as much involvement as we want, but it would get done. We could use stock, but competitors might also use it, and it likely won't align with the brand or drive the conversion I need to stand out, as we saw earlier. Or I could go out and I could search my Instagram or my own network to find photographers and communicate with them in emails or direct message, but it'll be really time consuming because of how fragmented that process will be. And these options typically compromise in one of three areas, either time, quality, or budget. But we've developed Snapwire's platform so that marketing teams can have all three. They can have speed, quality, and affordability. So I'm excited to dive into what we do more.
Yeah, I mean, Snapwire's mission statement is to dramatically improve the efficiencies around content production and empower creators to thrive doing what they love. And, we're here to serve marketers and creatives, and also the creators and freelancers that ultimately create that content. We understand that everything involved in producing content tends to be more difficult than it needs to be. The process has been extraordinarily fragmented. Whether it's trying to gather up with the right stakeholders and get alignment on what it is that we're trying to the vision for what we're trying to produce, or whether it's trying to find the right freelancer for your specific job, and even by the time you get the assets back, just even agreeing on and coming to an understanding of hey, this did meet our vision or this didn't meet our vision, and what's going to work for the market can be a very painful process. Ultimately, all of this ends up taking longer than we initially suspected, before we even started creating content. So ultimately, we want marketers to be focused on the content production process to be enjoyable and to buy into that, and allow brands to be focused on telling a cohesive story that ultimately is going to convert and market, and not managing the logistics or the mechanical pieces of producing content itself. It should be a fun process. It should be a process that ultimately results in enjoyment, not only for you yourself, but also for the other stakeholders, and ultimately for other executives inside the organization, as they can see the end result and the output of what you've been able to create.
So the best part of Snapwire, in my biased opinion, and the heart of the business is of how we strive to help teams be agile, is accessing creators anywhere. Most people in the creative world don't really know where to go outside of their immediate network. We've learned that over countless interviews with our customers, and people that aren't our customers, because they build up this network over years of creative experience. But now people are realizing that creators anywhere in the world are at their fingertips, and inviting them and communicating them can be really easy, all the way from assigning them to a brief to getting the content delivered. And your content shouldn't always look the same, but it should look consistent. So one way to do that is to get more diversity and localization while following the same concepts and the same brand guidelines. So the creator community makes it really easy to get that variety and get that local feel, because you're still following the same brand consistency, but you're maybe scaling that across a few different styles or a few different locations.
Yeah, and one of the trends we've seen, obviously with travel being halted, and with limits being placed on how many people can gather inside one location at any point in time, is remote production. And we've seen teams that traditionally would actually go to shoots all in person, and be able to art direct or creative direct in person, actually be able to adapt using Snapwire, be able to run remote productions from the comfort of their own home, and be able to produce content regardless of the time or place of where they're at. So we've seen teams that one of our particular clients based in San Francisco usually is art directing, creative directing in person for every single shoot, and they've just completed a shoot out in Germany. Was able to remote produce from the comfort of their own home, halfway across the world, be able to get assets back in a matter of days, not weeks, and ultimately still get the quality that they wanted from the get-go. Everything inside Snapwire starts with the creative brief, and so one of the most consistent pain points we've heard from most of our customers is how difficult this and painstaking this process can be. Oops, Aaron, it looks like there we go. It looks like how difficult this process can be. Across over throughout our customer research, we've interviewed over 50 people to be able to just build this one aspect of the product, and one of the common threads was that it takes over 7 meetings just to build out a creative brief internally. And in an era where you're needing to adapt and be able to be more agile and be able to produce more content than ever before, that's just not reasonable to be able to get the volume of content out that's needed.
What we're looking at right now that Aaron's pulled up is the Snapwire creator search page, and where people can narrow their search and discover new talent. So creatives don't need to be limited to creators only in their local network or their social network anymore, because with a production platform like this, it's easy to discover and onboard talented creators in a way that where you can find and hire anywhere in the world or any type of style, skip the lengthy onboarding because you hire them through Snapwire, brief them all at once in a standardized way, and then pay them through the platform so that you don't get hung up with your finance team and a million different invoices. And all of the creators are heavily vetted by our internal team, so you can be sure that you're going to get quality with any of the creators you choose. So all in all, there's a need to produce more content faster and to do it remotely. And Snapware's focus has always been how can we help marketers scale processes in order to keep up with the demand. And now the pandemic has caused a reduction in the average size of a marketing or a creative team to actually execute on the brand needs. But it's still possible to make sure that the content demands are met without the resources you may have previously had using Snapwire's network and managing everything in one centralized place. So without a production platform, it's really hard to manage more than one photo or video production at once, at least without putting a individual project manager on each project and likely doing just one at a time. And doing it remotely can actually make it easier to scale because it's centralized. You can manage more than one production project at once without losing the quality or spending extra time and budget. So scaling could mean, like I mentioned before, it could mean scaling across multiple locations. Here we're looking at a shoot that happened in Korea, but I know the same concept happened in Italy to get that localization. It could also mean scaling up in just the volumes and variety because everything's all in one place. Everybody, all the stakeholders can get aligned very easily and access anything as needed right from one spot. So I think we're going to take some questions now.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, thanks everyone for sitting through everything and, listening to us talk a little bit about how, we see the digital landscape shifting, how content creation plays into that, everything from, obviously the last year being as difficult as it was, the digital shifts that we've seen in that to, how to be able to adapt to how to be able to adapt to that environment, and ultimately how Snapwire can play a role in helping you adapt throughout these global changes. So. Yeah, let's open up
Absolutely.
for questions.
So Audrey had a really great question. She said that I use project management softwares like Monday and Asana. Does your platform have any integrations with those tools? Ryan, this might be a good question for you.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we do. So, we've seen a lot of teams, divide their workflows across, traditional project management tools like Rike and Asana, and then Snapwire, in a way where traditional project management tools are more universal throughout an organization and more for the planning process of, how campaigns are actually going to get executed, whereas Snapwire ultimately ends up being the place where production lives, for those brands and businesses. So from the time that you create a creative brief to the time you deliver assets back, that's really where I think most brands are seeing most of the value within Snapwire, and then obviously using traditional project management tools with Snapwire bookended on either ends of that to be able to ensure that they're creating content at the scale that's needed.
My own creator, can I have them work on my brief?
Yeah, absolutely. If a brand wants to onboard their own creators, those creators will be automatically approved to the platform, trusting that they've worked with our brands before, and they can be assigned to any brief you want. So it can be a central place to manage both your internal roster of creators and your external roster of creators.
And we'll do, oh, Dale has a question. Oh, no. Yes, Dale.
Yeah. Yeah, Dale, looks like you want to be a creator. No problem. We'll be sure to get you in touch with our community team and be able to get you onboarded in the platform and start
Definitely.
taking on briefs.
One last question before we go. Sterling asked, can Snapwire create video assets?
Yeah, Rachel, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Our community of creator largely consists of both photographers and videographers right now. We actually have an internal production team as well. As a side note, if you start a brief and you want extra help on it, our team can always help with that. And they've produced hundreds of videos for our clients. So we have really trusted videographers in our network as well.
Cool. Any other questions?
If you have any further questions, I'll go back. If you want to email any of us, our contact information is on the bottom right there. But thank you guys, and I hope to see you all soon for the next one. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.